Okay, we'll get started. It's so good to see everyone, or your names, your boxes. Thanks for joining us. Hello and welcome. My name is Mary Toller, and I am the director of the Staley School of Leadership Studies, and serving this year as the chair of the What Matters to Me Most and Why lecture series, while Dr. Carrie Priest is on sabbatical. To each of you joining us virtually, welcome. A reminder to please mute your mics. We will be using slides throughout, and you may find it easiest to use the speaker view for this session. You can leave your camera on or off. The chat will be on for greetings. It'll be off during the presentation, and then on again for the Q&A at the end, which Dr. Trish Gott has graciously agreed to moderate for us. The What Matters Most to Me and Why Speaker series is sponsored by the Staley School of Leadership Studies and supported by a cross-campus planning committee that you see here. The series was designed to build and strengthen bonds between people who teach and learn and work together daily, and to foster understanding of how each of us embraces our values and K-State's principles of community. Telling our individual and collective stories is a way to share the values that define us. Our stories represent choice points, moments when we faced a challenge, made a choice, experienced an outcome, and learned something. As we tell and listen to each other's stories of what matters most, we build and strengthen our community. I would like to invite Enoch Okowa to introduce our speaker today. Enoch?
Hello, my name is Enoch Okowa, a second-year master's student at the Department of Regional and Community Planning, and I'm here to introduce our awesome speaker for today, and she is nobody other than the director of the Multicultural Student Diversity and Multicultural Student Affairs, specifically Intercultural Learning and Academic Success Office. And I met this person serving as her research assistant. And even before we started working together, I just felt like this person can serve like my mom. Like I have a mom here in the States now. So she just performed and filled that space for me all of a sudden. And she is someone that I look up to so much. She's an advisor, and it looks like she is just a great person to be working with. And I must confess that I miss working with her. And we have so many, we have so many things that we are planning to do in the future that I am hoping that would come soon, that we do it. She is a music lover. She is a wonderful person that I think everybody who has met or who is going to meet her would just fall in love with her at a glance or immediately. And she is nobody other than our wonderful Dr. Debra Bolton.
Thank you, Enoch. Wow. Whoa. And I have to kind of give a nod to Catherine Sheefrick. She was my intern at when I was in Garden City, and she came from K-State, and she's here today. And so that's pretty exciting. Welcome to you all. Are you ready for me to share my screen, Andrea? Okay. So this seems like it'll be about 50 minutes of me talking about myself, and that's not in my nature, but you know, it's part of what we do. So okay, I'm going to share my screen, but I'm not going to share my notes necessarily, because so you can see my whole screen, but you're not seeing my notes, right?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So I have all these pictures up here. And I thought about this when I was invited, because my dad used to say, know something about everything and everything about something, and you will always be able to find common ground with another person. So I'm going to describe my penchant for music, literature, geography, history, art, language, biology, architecture, travel, navigation and air travel, and people. It would just be easier to point you to my blog because I talk about all of these things. And so anyway, I'll be talking about all of this. And I thought I'm not even going to condense all of it, but I do believe that these varied interests of mine are what greatly inform my work in intercultural learning. It's what I live, it's what I love. So let's get started with this now. But first of all, I wanted to give my land acknowledgement. My homeland is the Uncompahgre Valley in western Colorado, from where my father's people, the Ute, the Uncompahgre, were displaced by settlers. In Kansas, I live and work on the ancestral territory of many indigenous nations, including the Kaw, the Osage, and the Pawnee, and is currently home to the Prairie Band Potawatomi, the Kickapoo tribe, the Iowa, and the Sac and Fox. I am grateful to these nations, and I ask you to please remember these truths. And of course, in all this, we want you to think about that, like who held the land, who granted the land, and just some of the things that went along with the land being redistributed, such as the Homestead Act. And just to tell you a little bit about myself, I have to use this illustration of my husband and me that are she was 9 years old at the time, drew of us. I just liked it because she gave me a neck. So that was pretty cool. But this was all on her own. And then she just kind of looked at the things that we were interested in and put them in there. So it just tells you some of my identities. And of course, I'm American Indian, Native American, Indigenous first, Okiawinge, Dene, and Uncompahgre. But I have all these identities, as you do too. And that's one of the things I try to instill in the students when I'm in the classes. Our identities can be all of these different things, and our identities are what become part of our cultural identity. So whenever I hear a student say, I don't really have a culture, I'm going, oh no, you just haven't had to think about it. So here are just some of the identities that I hold. And I have to put a bunch of things in there that I do. And I'll talk a little bit about those. Go to the next slide here. It's always kind of slow. So my homeland is the Uncompahgre Valley. I'm standing on the hogback, not far from my childhood home here. And when I took a 360 every day in that valley, I saw the San Juans to the south, the San Juan mountain range, which I've climbed about half of the 14ers there. And to the north, you'd see the Grand Mesa, which is the world's largest flat top mountain. To the east, we would look at the Grand Mesa, or the oh, I forgot the name. I'm a little shaken up right now. Anyway, it's a national park, and it's 5 minutes from my childhood home. And then to the west, we have the Spring Creek Mesa. And so I was always surrounded by all of these wonderful mountains that we spent all of our time in. And this valley offers rich farming and ranching land. Of course, my people mostly existed in the what we are left of us today mostly exists in the Chipeta Museum. And it's our story told through the eyes of other people. And of course, the school system thinks they're honoring us by calling themselves the Montrose Indians, and the junior high being the Montrose Papooses. We still haven't convinced them that it doesn't honor us, and we're working on that. And so the initial name of this town was called Pomona, who is the royal goddess of fruit, which was aptly named because it's a fruit-bearing valley with potatoes, apples, onions, all of these things, and sheep. My father was sheep people, and Then the name gave way to Montrose to honor John Graham, the 4th Earl of Montrose of Scottish history, and its surrender to England. So that's the name that my hometown carries. That's what they're honoring. And I would say that that's more of an honor to that person than probably Montrose. I do like Bizarro because Bizarro has all of these great comics, and he does honor natives quite a bit. And I love this one because the man is complaining about his coffee having pottery shards and bone fragments, and the waiter says it's 100% pre-Columbian. So that really kind of spoke to me. So I'll pop a few of those in as we go along this morning. So my father, I can't stop talking about my father today. Of course, my mother is still with me at 90 years old and still influences me, of course. But I always think about growing up in a household where the National Geographic magazine was honored as much as the family Bible. My father read them from cover to cover. My brothers saw them as an anatomy lesson sometimes. I vowed to visit all the places unimaginable that I had seen. And so my work with the National Geographic Society as an explorer puts me in the company of people like Maria Mitchell, noted astronomer in the 19th century, Manuza Alam, 21st century as astrophysicist, and then the one that I really like is, I have a picture of her here. Her name is Harriet Chalmers Adams, and she was journalist in the French trenches of World War I, and notably traveled to to Africa to see Haile Selassie's coronation as Emperor of Ethiopia. Of course, everyone knows the names of Edmund Hillary, Jacques Cousteau, and Alexander Graham Bell as National Geographic explorers, but I encourage you to seek out the females who made great strides in the name of discovery. And so being a National Geographic explorer is one of the greatest ways I can honor my father's love of knowledge. And I was the first ever explorer who was funded in education rather than actual traveling, although I want to change that one day too, that I get to travel more, but bringing geography to underserved populations became a very important part of what I do for National Geographic Society. And probably two of the products that I'm most proud of in my tenure as an explorer is collaborating recently. Well, it took 2 years to write the book, but with some anthropologists, and we wrote on the African diaspora. While most of theirs focuses on the actual African continent, my chapter focuses on the diaspora in Southwest Kansas, which is significant. There are about 10 countries on the African continent currently represented there. So I talk about how they found home as displaced people because of conflict in their own communities. And then, of course, instilling geographical awareness and curiosity, because curiosity is the biggest thing, to high school females of color, certainly underserved population and underrepresented in geography today. And I'd have to say, Tram Fan is now at K-State, who is in my first cohort. And we have 3 students right now, seniors in high school, who are planning to come to Kansas State University. So very excited about that. So moving on to some other interests of mine. Does anybody know who this is? If you do, and where can you find this? On the campus of Kansas State University. So if you know who this is and you know where to find it, put it in the chat box, and I might be able to see it, I don't know, before I reveal who that is. Do you? Okay. Well, this is George Washington Carver, who has been one of my heroes for a very long time. And when I first came from Southwest Kansas working at the Extension Research and Extension Center there and got my job on campus. I used to roam on lunch times when I had lunch times, and I would go to the museum every day if I could, and then walk through the All Faith Chapel and the Danforth Chapel. And to my great excitement, when you walk into the Danforth Chapel, there's the foyer that's right there. And if you look to your right, there's a large stained glass. George Washington Carver is in that stained glass, which really excited me. And of course, he's next to Louis Pasteur, which is really cool. And just that he was there, because he was actually allowed to homestead in Kansas, but he wasn't allowed to go to school. He was accepted at Highland, what is now university. But when he showed up, oh no, we can't educate you. And so what was really cool is he found his academic home. First, he went to Simpson College in Indianola, Iowa. And of course, he was only allowed to enroll in the fine arts. No one expected that he had this genius scientific mind. And so his art teacher saw that he was such a great illustrator of plants and anatomy of animals. And so happened that her husband was the biology teacher at what is now Iowa State University. And so she introduced him, and of course the rest is history. And what was really cool about that is that's where he started creating things, like getting patents on things like furniture stain and varnishes. And so he was courted by first Henry Ford, because he had created rubber out of goldenrod. And so I said, no, I don't want to go work for you. And then Thomas Edison shows up. Come work for me. You've got this great mind for invention. No, I don't really want to do that either. And then Booker T. Washington shows up. Why don't you come to work at Tuskegee what they used to call Normal Institute. It's now, of course, Tuskegee University. He says, yes, I will go there because that's where I'll do the most good. And so the first day that he had class, he took his students to find things. So they would find broken jars that had been discarded for their beakers. And, he just kind of had to set everything up that way with his students. And of course, the rest is history for what we know. He did have a small homestead in Beeler, Kansas. And he took in washing and ironing to support himself, and he taught music lessons. He had this wonderful voice, and he played violin, and so he taught music lessons, and that's how he put himself through high school and supported himself that way, because he was all about himself. And so these are just some of the things I picked up from him. I actually do a whole presentation on George Washington Carver, which I mostly present to historical societies. So it's kind of fun. So then my next one. Oh, so I had a picture of King Alfonso X in my opening slide, and people might wonder, who the heck is that? Well, for 10 years, I've done a public radio, 2-hour public radio special about the history of King Alfonso X as told through the 420 poems and songs and the commissioned art pieces he did to go along with those poems and songs. And this is 13th century. It wasn't even called Spain yet. It was called Castilian. And he is said to be the father of the language Castilian, which we know as Spanish. Then it was called Romance or Galician Portuguese. And that's how that language was developed. Anyway, not everyone in his kingdom could read and write. And so that's how he taught morality, through the teachings of the Virgin Mary. And so these were songs and poems and musical and 3D artistic pieces. That's how he taught morality. But the really great thing that I liked about him was he was a true pluralist. He had, of course, he was Christian, Catholic. He had Muslim and Jewish people in his court. He honored the Muslims' knowledge of astronomy. He honored the Jewish in their astronomy. He honored the Muslim for their architecture. So he had all of these people in his that we saw separated 200 years later, thanks to the doctrine of discovery that launched Christopher Columbus. But he was a true pluralist and really appreciated people for what they brought to the table without judging them. Of course, he used to say, well, if they knew better, they would do better in that sense, if, you know, but they have all this knowledge and I want to have all this knowledge at my hands. And they called him El Sabio, which meant the wise. And he was actually going to be crowned the Holy Roman Emperor. But alas, the Pope at the time didn't vote for him and voted for someone from Austria. I can't remember the name at the moment, because he thought Alfonso X was too learned. He knew too much. He can't be the empire, you know, the Holy Roman Empire, maybe because he couldn't be, you know, swayed to a lot of things. So in my research of this, there's research in history, there's research in music, there's and instruments of the time. So I have here the organetto. This is the oud. That word comes from the Arabic word wood, and that was the precursor of what we know as the guitar. And the organetto, this was you could put it, sling it over your shoulder and play. And oh, the music is just wonderful. One of the most interesting, I think, is the Hurdy Gertie. The Hurdy Gertie takes about 5 to 7 years to build. And it has, you can kind of see the little string, the little, the keys here that you play with your hand, but you turn that, in French, it's called the viola dorida. So it's the viola, it has strings like a viola or violin, and then it has that rita, the wheel. I keep pointing at this wheel here that rubs over the strings, and you put resin on it like you would your violin bow, and then it plays. It's just this wonderful music. And these were some of his 2D illustrations of some of the music. This is Hurdy Gertie, and it was even so big at one time that 2 people had to play it. This is Jessica Knaus. She's one of my favorite authors in the research of Alfonso and has often been on my radio show when I interview her. And this is called a gaita. So this is the bagpipe of Galicia. And if you look at Spain, it's kind of square. And Galicia is right north of Portugal. And Galicia was the really interesting place because that's where the Celts landed. That's where the Jewish people were kind of focused, the Sephardic Jewish people. And all of those regions, and since it was a Celtic region too, a lot of Celts had bagpipes. And so this was the Spanish or the Galician version of a bagpipe called the gaita. And then the viola da gamba, if you think of the word, you heard the term gams, legs. The viola da gamba was once a pretty good sized instrument that you played, holding it between your gams, your legs. And Jordi Savall is the leading expert on the viola da gamba. And so, of course, I'm a little bit of a hero worshiper here. And I never got to have, it seems like I don't get to have very many pictures of my female heroines, so they don't travel as much maybe. So here's another good old Bizarro. I'm not to offend anybody, I just think he's funny. And then my own identity as an American Indian is important to me because it's something that that we work on constantly. In education, I would have to think one of the things that we really sort of not fight against, but when we're always trying to educate is like if someone says, well, we're going to come in and show you how to farm. No, you're not going to show us how to farm. We knew how to farm all along. What often happens is through displacement on our land, those kinds of things, those food ways, those agricultural ways, the way that we supported ourselves were often taken away from us. So we're in the process of restoring those, which I think is really important for us. I just wrote an article about banking and money management in Native communities. And I noticed that the premise that the people who invited me to write this was that we're poor because we don't know how to manage money. No, we're taken away from our ways, and what we consider currency isn't necessarily folding money. So we also have to kind of acknowledge what we know and somehow blend it in. So we work really hard on that. And of course, through DNA, I am connected to the Athabascan in Alaska. I want you to notice the face of this young lady here, and then notice here. So this is how she was with her people, and they're creative, they're beautiful. But when she was displaced, she was put in a corset and her hair was tied back. And that's something that we really talk about a lot, the erasure of who we are and all of that. But we have a lot to offer because we had traditional knowledge, because we had a way to be that was, and it wasn't seen as right somehow, but to restore that identity is really important for all of us. I have to tell you that my people, they were called the San Juan Pueblo before we took our Tewa name back of Oke Owinge, were colonized, and it was actually the original government of what is now New Mexico. So the Oke Owinge were positioned where the Chama and the Rio Grande are confluence in that part of what is now New Mexico. And so when the Spanish came in and separated us, they moved part of us onto that side, and they set their government up on the other side in our houses. You know, we built those large adobe houses with lots of apartments. I should have had a picture of one. And they're the ones that called us San Juan Pueblo. That name Pueblo came from the Spanish word meaning city, community. And so they noticed how we built our houses, and they called that a pueblo. And interestingly, that area was the original capital of what is now New Mexico, because the San Juan, the people that had settled there from Spain, actually was setting that up. But now you know where it is now. We were the people of the strong land. You can go. Here's a cartoon of Popeye. He led the resistance, and so Spain made it to what is now New Mexico in 1535. And you know that the Plymouth Rock landing happened in 1640. So Spain went south, and then English settlers went west. But if Spain would have gone north a little more than what is now New Mexico and Colorado, we might be a Spanish-speaking country. So we missed that by not very far, if you want to know the truth about that. But despite the push toward erasure, we're still here, we're strong, we're doing things, and we are a notable force, I think. And if you look at the great Ansel Adams, he took this iconic picture, which is in many of the posters that you see of Ansel Adams, and this is called Moonrise over Hernandez, New Mexico. Hernandez, New Mexico is the heart of Oke Owinge Pueblo. And I have to tell you, my great-great-great-grandmother only had one name. Her name was Nepomucena. And also goddess of fruit. And when she was captured as a wife or whatever it was back by Spanish settlers, so the name of the family is Herrera, which means in Spanish, or let's see, in Latin, the Latin term for Herrera comes from Ferraria. I can't even pronounce it, but it means iron. And the Herrera were the ironsmiths of what is now Spain and Galicia. So that's where that name came from. But if you go to the state, the US Capitol, you will be able to see a statue of Popeye, our great leader of the Okiawinge. And so another one of my great pleasures and honors is to instill this curiosity, because again, curiosity was the thing that my father really wanted to instill in us, curiosity and sharing your love for knowledge with others. So this was our then 9-year-old granddaughter. She goes to an international conference with me. I've been taking her to this conference for about 5 years now. Well, maybe less. She was 9 here now. She's about to turn 13. So this is her first year, and she presented a poster on sexism in the toy aisle. And so she talked about, you go into the toy aisle of the blue one and it's power, it's strength. You go into the pink toy aisle, it's unicorns and fairies and this kind of thing. So she's telling me this story and I'm going, well, honey, that's called sexism. You're talking about toy aisle. So she tells me all of that and I help her illustrate. And so they were so taken by this 9-year-old presenting at this research conference, they decided to create a new segment so that the grad students didn't have to compete with her, because she would get all the votes, and the grad students were kind of like, we did all this research and she got all the votes. So they created a new segment for youth researchers. And the second year she went, she did a poster on why parents should love their children no matter who their children love. And keep in mind, she's coming to me with these things and I always think, oh, these things are working that I talk about all the time. And then the one that she was supposed to do before the COVID hit, we didn't get to have the conference last year. It was called here, so you think it's unfair, and then the colon, advocacy begins now. And so just the things, getting students to talk, getting her peers to talk about, if you think it's unfair, then do some research on it, see why it is, and that. And her mother, may she rest in peace, was our daughter, and she instilled that in her too, because she had a great love for those kinds of things. So keeping that alive in your progeny is, I think, a very important thing. So I'll try to go through these a little quicker now. I'm talking too much, I think. For 22 years that I lived in Southwest Kansas, I was the bird specialist at the Lee Richardson Zoo. That was a volunteer position. I didn't get paid for that. And it was always a great thing to be that. And geographer, of course. And so talking about distributions of animals, geographic distribution, why animals look the way they do, why they adapt the way they do, and that sort of thing. And so I put me hugging this tree because I called myself a tree hugger. I was just recruited to be a trustee for the Kansas chapter of the Nature Conservancy. And of course, between 2007 and 2013, I was actually a commissioner for the Department of Wildlife, Parks, and Tourism. So the nature and our use of the land and the water and all the natural resources is very important to me. And of course, that comes from my family, always being good stewards of the land. And so I had to put the picture in because somebody called me a tree hugger. Of course, I said thank you, but that was my years of being a birder, and I'm still an avid birder. And biologist. If you ever looked at my bachelor's degree, it's a big fat one because I changed my mind so many times. And I was a biology major at one time. And so when I was in my, and Kate Schiefrick can attest to this, I kept lots of bugs in my office when I was at the Research and Extension Center. And I didn't get to bring any of them with me, so I had to adopt them out. I had tarantulas, and this is a molting giant cave roach who's going to be, about that big after a while. And I had a Madagascan hissing cockroaches and lots of cool things like that. So, and then of course, the nice thing is that you could also raise little bugs that birds would eat too. So that was it. Someone's getting sick, I can tell. I'll move on to another bizarro. And probably what I'd have to say the most is just curiosity and making connections with people, and understanding that the more you know about someone, no matter who that is, the more often you will not find any sorts of divides. And that takes curiosity, that takes understanding who you are, that takes understanding what your cultural identities are. And that's a plural. You can, anytime you say, I am this, that is part of your cultural identity. And that's part of what I teach the students. And I have to tell you, the thing I hear the most when I say, tell me about your culture. I don't really have a culture. I'm just a normal American. So then I say, what about having a culture would make you abnormal? And it's just that if we don't have to think about our identities, we don't think of them as our cultural identity. So all of these different things that you think about and how you connect with people and connecting with people. I had a story about our daughter, and I started to tell this story at her funeral. And I just remembered that she would have dreams when she was young about driving. She always dreamed she was driving and opening the doors, and animals would jump in. And so by the time she reached her destination, she'd have about 10 different kinds of animals, birds and all these different animals in her car. And I started to say, and I think she collected people the same way, but then I realized her collection of people were in that room, and she called them the village. The village was just this thriving group of people who absolutely looked to what they called her mama bear. They were all her peers. And I didn't want them to think that I was thinking that, she's collecting, but I wanted to say she collected people that same way too, by being interested in every type and kind and of persons that she could. And I think that I would have to say that too. It's really interesting. And I could watch my father at a stop sign back when people had their windows rolled down. He would just, at a stoplight, he would start talking to someone at the next car, and they'd have these great conversations. And then he liked to come and see us on the bus, of all places. Why do you want to ride the bus, Dad? Why don't you take the airplane? He goes, because you can talk to a lot more people on the bus. But the sad thing is that he would give his money away to them too, because they apparently needed it worse than he did. So I always think about our identities and interacting with one another and connecting with people and finding your best way to connect with people. And curiosity, ask questions. Don't assume that what you're observing is going to answer what you think or your curiosity about another person. Ask the questions. And I think that you'll always that you'll come to cultural humility, to know that your way isn't the only way, that we have something to learn from everyone that we come across. And so I would just end this by talking about culture as a thing that we grow. If you think of agriculture, monoculture, horticultures, and what are we most worried about right now? Well, that's bacterial cultures, when we're cleaning our hands all the time to make sure that we don't catch a virus. So thinking of how they grow, it's something, culture is the story of who we are. Culture is not a choice. The moment we open our eyes, we're having our cultural ideals transmitted to us through facial expressions, through language, from our parents, and from every surrounding that we come to. And that's how we know all about our own culture. So learning about ourselves is the most important thing. It's not in our blood, it's fluid, we adapt. I didn't grow up eating curry, and I didn't grow up eating sushi, but I am glad to adapt that culture into my life. And so that's another way of looking at it. It's not a choice, comes from human agency. And I'll end by showing you my picture of what I used to call the Kitty UN. All these kids are growing up now. This is the young lady who will be coming to K-State this fall. And she was one of my Girl Power GIS students. And so here's oldest grandson. He now is a hairy young 18-year-old taking lots of math at his college. He's still in he'll graduate this year. This is our other grandson and our other grandson. And you already saw a picture of our granddaughter. And these are friends from along the way. And that's who we are. So I will stop here and see if you have any questions. Let me stop my share.
Dr. Bolton, I don't have any questions. I just wanted to say thank you so much for this. This was absolutely fantastic. And it is an honor to have you at Kansas State University with us.
Thank you very, very much. I appreciate that.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Bolton. Really appreciate your presentation, and how you decided what to share with us was very. Thanks for accepting the invitation.
Thank you.
Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Dee. I like what you said. Thank you. Thank you all. And if you ever want to check out my blog, it's at peopleandcultures.blog on WordPress. And it's just as scattered as I am. I tend to, we've been working on a grant called Neurodiversity. And I know that's what I've always had a challenge from.
Dr. Bolton,
Yes.
this is Trish Scott, and you've got two questions in the chat. One is if you would talk a little bit more about being a motorcycle rider, and in particular, what kind of bike you ride. Mary Muth rides an Electroglide.
Oh, well, I can't reach the ground on very many things. I started out on a Vespa, and my husband rides a BMW, and we wanted to go to the mountains and all that. So then I got a Suzuki Bergman, which is a 400cc, and it pulled me over the mountain just fine. Probably because, I didn't used to weigh all that. But about 3 years ago, I bought a Can-Am Spider, which has two wheels in the front, one in the back, and I don't have to reach the ground, but I've always been challenged by reaching the ground and being at tiptoe, and I wanted it to be a little more solid. So I ride a Can-Am Spider right now. And what was the other question?
It was just to understand a little bit more about motorcycle riding.
Yeah, and we do camping. Yeah, we motorcycle camp, and that's always a lot of fun. Go to rallies and things like that.
Some of the comments, Dean DeNoble's offering that you should be in a Dos Equis commercial as the most interesting person in the world.
Thank you.
And a lot of appreciation being expressed.
Thank you. Thank you.
I have a question for you, Debra. Do you have any, you shared about how sometimes students or others will come up and say, I don't have a culture, or I don't know how to answer that question. what are the ways that you encourage, you know, what questions do you ask, or what do you encourage them in terms of sparking that curiosity, and maybe a different lens on what cultural identity means?
Sure. I just say, well, you probably haven't had to think about it much, but what are some of the foods that you grew up eating? What are some of the celebrations that you had in your family? What's something that maybe someone doesn't know about you and your family? And as they start to talk about that, I said, everything that you talk about is identity. Identity is culture. And so we talk a lot about those kinds of things. And then at the end, they go, okay, well, I'm this, I'm that. And they'll go, well, I'm an American, but just think of what the US looks like. Every different section. So American doesn't tell me much until we start drilling down. So think of it as drilling down. How did this happen? So we're always backing up in a sense. Where did your grandparents come from? Where did their grandparents come from? And where did their grandparents come from? And what were the things that were specific to that country, to your geography? Did you grow up in the urban area, in rural? So just getting them to think about that. Oh, add my blog address. I think it's just peopleandcultures.blog, and it's all one word, peopleandcultures.blog. I think that's what it is, but I can send it out to you, Dee. Thank you. Thank you. Anything else?
Kate, do you want to ask your question?
Yeah. So I really love that quote, know something about everything and everything about something. I see that like in my own father. How did you personally, or how do you recommend choosing that one thing to know everything about? Or in your case, I really think you know everything about more than one thing. But how did you come to choose those things that you are so knowledgeable about?
I think curiosity, if you know, and it's going down a lot of rabbit holes. So if I see something, I want to, okay, what do I know about it? And you know, the beauty of the internet now. So I used to have to go to the library and flip through everything, which was always kind of cool. But you know, the internet and finding, of course, resources that are, you know, right, and well, you know, resources that are accurate. And I don't know. I don't know that I've ever found that thing that I know everything about yet. You know, you think it's what you do with your dissertation, and I did social capital in rural communities with high so-called minority percentages. So how do people connect? And that's that same thing. What are the connections they made to make it to what is now the United States? And I think, you know, okay, then I find something else. You find another rabbit hole down every rabbit hole you go to. So I don't think I've ever reached the knowing everything about one thing, but I'm always still working on know something about everything. The most important thing is that you want to be able to talk to anyone at a party and find a connection with people. Even if they say one word, oh, I know a little bit about that. Tell me, you know, that kind of helps. I don't know if I answered your question, Kate, but I remember in the letter that you wrote to me, I practically framed that, but I will never throw that away, because you talked about finding interest in a lot of things, and I certainly saw that in you. So that was really cool that you're here today. Very touching. Thank you.
Dr. Bolton, Dean DeNoble would like to know if that was a northern goshawk in the upper left-hand slide that you were holding.
Let me see, what am I? Oh,
and I might have mispronounced
are
that
you a
name.
birder? That's cool. I found a kindred spirit. I'm going to go back and look. I can't remember which one that was. Yes, it is in the upper left-hand corner. Is that the one?
Yes, that's the one.
And then the one where I have really short hair is a Peregrine Falcon, my very favorite bird. I have a lot of favorites, but it's one of my very favorite. And then this is then on the right. Oh, then there was a great horned owl in one, and we don't have great horned owls here, but to my great surprise, we have gray owls here in this side of the 100th meridian. So it's really cool to have the gray owls there for the wind. Okay, and just robins and things like that. But yeah, that's what it is. Good job. Any other questions? Well, thank you. I really appreciate you're all coming today, and it was an honor to talk about things that I'm really interested in. I didn't reach everything. I didn't get to talk about architecture and all that, but hopefully another time we can sit down and chat when people get to. Okay.
Oh, here
Thank
we do have one more question for you. Have you ever met somebody who said they were a normal American, not because they found culture abnormal, but because they just couldn't differentiate it, I think means their own culture from normalcy?
I think that's the what undergirds that statement. This is what I think of as normal. And hopefully we all tend to think of who we are as normal rather than anything not being normal. But even though each one of us is as different as we can be from one another, in some cases, we are normal in our own identities. And that's, I think, what I try to teach when somebody says, I don't have that, I'm just a normal American. But thank you, that's a good question.
Power of our words. Well, I want to thank you, Dr. Bolton. Thank you, Enoch, as well, for joining us today and sharing the introduction of Dr. Bolton and for participating in this series, which really is an opportunity for us to learn more about one another, to demonstrate that curiosity that you were talking about in knowing people at a deeper level by understanding what they value, so that we can continue to grow and build this community and live out our principles of community here at K-State. So thank you all for joining us today. Stay tuned for the next in the series. I don't have it in front of me, so just keep an eye out for it. And again, thank you so much for being here today. Have a good afternoon.
Thank you.
Yeah. Bye-bye.